Hello and welcome. This is Karen Motikaitis, and you're listening to How She Really Does It, the place where inspiration and possibility meet. I'm so excited to have you here with me on YouTube. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like this video. Make sure to also head down to the description box below and click the link to sign up for my newsletter to get podcast episodes and Sunday's letters filled with love delivered to your email inbox weekly. Now here's the show.
On a lake, she is dreaming, she is drifting, never been so wide awake. Captured in the moment by the beauty all around her, there's nowhere else that she would rather be.
Hello and welcome. This is Karen Motikaitis, and you're listening to How She Really Does It, the place where inspiration and possibility meet on KDRT 95.7 FM. Dr. Heidi Grant Halvorson is a social psychologist who researches, writes, and speaks about the science of motivation. She is the Associate Director of the Motivation Center at Columbia Business School and author of the best-selling books Succeed, and she's also the co-author of her latest book, Focus, Use Different Ways of Seeing the World to Power, Success, and Influence. The last time Heidi was here, we discussed motivation and influence in ourselves and our careers. And from that interview, we wanted to have the spin-off conversation about how we can apply her research for parenting, motivating, and influencing our own children. So Heidi, hello and welcome back.
Hi, great to be back.
So I love that how you can have this research and, in the professional setting of our lives, but we can also apply it to our children, which, our home frustrations can kind of spill over into our workplace, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. And what's interesting to me is I actually started out doing really the majority of my research for a decade in classrooms. And I was really interested in motivation in children and really in particular sort of trying to understand why it was that some children seem to respond to difficulty and challenge with resilience. I mean, and nobody's happy when they don't do well, but why were some kids able to sort of dig deep and do well, and others had more of a tendency to become helpless and to feel disengaged when things don't come to them easily. And it's one of these things that has absolutely nothing to do with intelligence or ability in any measurable sense. It's really a psychological thing. It's how kids think about challenge and difficulty and how they're motivated, how they tick. So I started out actually trying to figure out that stuff. And when I started writing about motivation, I assumed that the major audience for the work I was doing would be educators and parents. And then it just turned out that a lot of business people were actually interested in some of these same issues. And so that was very interesting for me to speak to that audience. But it's always really been the kids and the parents and the teachers that I've been most interested in talking to, because I think in many ways they're the group that really is so desperately looking for good solutions, and we care so much about our kids, and so to the extent that we can apply the science to try to find ways of being, as you say, more helping them to be more motivated, influencing them to make good choices, then that's very exciting for me.
Well, and because I'm a parent, and then in addition, to doing all that I do professionally, one of the things that I do in the evenings is that I work with youth and I coach swimming. So, motivating kids, I think it's, and then you're dealing with parents who are very highly successful. And there's that contrast where they're watching their kids and saying, why aren't they motivated? Why don't they want this? I would have loved to have had this when I was a child.
Right. And we always say stuff like that. And and part of that comes from, one of the things I know we're going to talk about today, which is that the sort of the flavor of motivation that we have as adults, the way we're motivated is often different than the way that children are motivated primarily, and it's easy to forget that, and we really don't realize it. But what seems like it makes so much sense to us now what seems like it should be so motivating now really doesn't fit well, provide what we call a good motivational fit for kids. And it's not just a matter of sort of the, using simple language. In fact, it's not that at all. It's really using different language to talk to people who are differently motivated, whether they're adults or children. That turns out to be really the key.
So I know we talked about this in the last interview, but for those that are coming on this interview for the first time, can you talk about those different flavors of motivation?
Sure. So we know that there are really, and this is research now that I've done with Tori Higgins, who's the director of the Motivation Center at Columbia Business School, and he's really the person who about 25, 30 years ago had this aha moment that said, wait a minute, there's really these two different ways of that anyone can approach a goal, something that they want to achieve. And now there's been really thousands and thousands of studies all over the world that have looked into these two kinds of motivation. We call them promotion focus and prevention focus. So when you're promotion focused, and you're pursuing a goal or something you want, you think about that goal as a way of ending up better off, right, as a way of advancing. So if I get this promotion, if I get this job, if I get an A in this class, if I am able to sell this book, then it's something that's going to leave me better off than I am now. It's going to help me to advance. It's something sort of I ideally would like to achieve. And when I achieve it, I'm going to feel excited, right? I'm going to feel joyful. And if I don't achieve it, then I'm going to feel sort of depressed and sad. When people are promotion focused and they think about their goals as opportunities to advance, to make progress, to end up better off, they think about their goals as ideals, then certain things become true. They are motivated by optimism. So when they feel optimistic, that really fuels their motivation. It really is important. It's really essential for them to feel that sense of I can do this and it's all going to be great, and that really kind of gets their juices flowing. We call that kind of motivation like eagerness, right? You feel really eager to get up and do it. We also know that they tend to have certain strengths when we're promotion focused. So promotion focused people, or when people are promotion focused, they tend to be more creative, more innovative, more comfortable with taking risks. They sort of, think outside the box. They come up with lots of solutions. They like to try new things. They work quickly, and they tend to have that sort of sunny outlook, right? That everybody talks about, that is so great. That sort of this, the tremendous positivity. But there's another way to think about our goals that just results, and it's not better or worse. It's just very different, and we call that prevention focus. When you are prevention focused about getting a job or getting an A in a class or selling your book or whatever it is, you're thinking about achieving that goal as a way to avoid bad things happening, right? To hang on to what you already got. So if I get a job, then having that job protects all the things I already have, right? It'll give me a sense of security and stability, and help me hang on to my home and take care of my children and fulfill my responsibilities and duties. If I get an A in a class, it means that I stay safe, right? I don't get in trouble. I don't end up closing doors to myself that I might have closed if I got a worse grade in the class. So when we're prevention focused, we're really thinking not so much about our goals as ways to advance or end up better off, but as ways to kind of keep things running smoothly and hang on to what we've already achieved. It's about avoiding loss rather than gain. And it can be the exact same goal, as I said. I mean, as a professor, I've seen lots and lots of kids come into my class. And for some of them, getting an A is something they ideally want, and they feel really excited when they get it. For other kids, it's really something they feel they ought to be able to do. It's a duty or an obligation to get an A. And when they get the A, they don't feel excited. They feel relieved. They feel calm and relaxed, like, whew, all right, I got the A. And so their emotions are different. Instead of joy, they feel relief. Instead of sadness or depression when they don't succeed, they feel anxiety and fear. They have a different set of strengths. So instead of being risk takers and creative thinkers, they tend to be more conservative, but they're very analytical. They're very disciplined. They're very organized, thorough. They're not speedy necessarily, because speed leads to mistakes, and that's not a good thing if you're prevention focused, but they are very accurate in what they do. They're the people you can always count on. Often in an organization, for example, it's the promotion focused people who are really the risk takers and super creative that get all the accolades. But the reality is, if you have a really strongly prevention focused person working and they leave, then everybody suddenly notices that absence, because that was the person that kept everything going, that kept everything running smoothly, that crossed the T's and dotted the I's. And the only time you really get appreciated if you're prevention focused is when you kind of come into a situation right after that, not having a prevention focused person on board, and everything's kind of gone to hell in a handcart, and then you fix it, and everyone's like, wow, thank God Bob's here to fix everything. He's so thorough and responsible. So it's a very, like I said, there are two different ways of being motivated. The reality is that we all do some of both. There are times when each of us is promotion focused and times when each of us is prevention focused. That being said, most people do tend to have a dominant focus, so they tend to be either more promotion or more prevention. It can sometimes be the case that there is a part of your life where you're very promotion focused and a part where you're very prevention. So for myself, for example, I tend to be very promotion focused about my work, but very, very, very prevention focused as a wife and mother. I would, if it were up to me, my kids would wear helmets all the time, and we would never go anywhere. And the only reason we ever take a vacation is because my husband drags us there because he's promotion focused, and I'm, the one who's making sure we have passports and unclean underwear and all that stuff. So it's in different areas of your life you can have a different focus. And the other thing that's true and that's relevant for what we're talking about today is that in general, and this isn't true across the board, but in general, people tend to start out a bit more promotion focused as children, and end up a bit more prevention-focused as adults. So we do see a shift over the lifespan. Again, not for everyone. Also, women tend to be a little more prevention-focused than men, but not everyone. So there do seem to be some trends that life experiences kind of shift our motivation and shift our thinking a bit.
And why is it that we start out, in general, more promotion-focused than prevention?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that for children, sort of, you have your whole. There are several things that are true. So children don't have a lot of responsibilities in general, having responsibilities, having things you sort of have to do, you feel that you ought to do. That's something that tends to make us more prevention focused. So kids don't have a lot of that. Most of the time, they're thinking about the things they do as ways to advance, as things they would ideally like to do, as opportunities to have good things happen. And because they haven't had a lot of life experience yet relative to an adult, they don't tend to think so much about how important it is to avoid bad things happening. So it's really, I think, in the state that we're born into, there's nowhere to go but up. That's what we think. Mm-hmm. and young people think that they're immortal, and that also kind of is a very promotion-focused way to be. It's why it's so difficult, for example, to get relatively young people, and by that I mean people in their 20s, to want to buy health insurance, because health insurance is a very prevention-focused product, right? It's about making sure that you don't lose everything if something goes wrong. But young people don't think about what could go wrong as much as older people do. And so for them, that just isn't a good fit for them. They're much more interested in being told about things that could help them to advance and end up better off. You also see it, interestingly, when we look at what predicts how attracted people are to a particular job or what kind of benefits they're looking for. Younger people across the board seem to be much more interested in having a job that has upward mobility, advancement possibilities, training and learning. Older people tend to be much more interested in knowing that there's like a really healthy 401k and a lot of job security and sick leave and things like that. So even the things that we are looking for as benefits can vary as a function of our focus. And so again, so children tend to be, again, with their kind of eyes on thinking of how they might end up better off and how they're kind of looking for, very sensitive to positives as we get older and as we have more responsibilities and more negative experiences. we become more in tune to the possibility that things might go wrong, and then to trying to prevent that from happening. I know a lot of women, for example, felt a very distinct shift when they became mothers. And I myself was like this. I think I was a much more overall, just sort of promotion-focused person until I was a mom. And then suddenly the world seemed to be filled with dangers. and that's what I spent a lot of my time thinking about. It shifted me into being a much more prevention-focused person. And again, I just want to say this, I know we talked about this last time, that for people listening, it sounds like promotion is the better one. I mean, everybody says, they say, well, you say that they're both good, but you don't really mean that. And no, I really mean that. And it's very cultural. So, the United States is probably the most promotion-focused culture on the planet. The American dream is the dream of the person who lifts themselves up by their bootstraps and goes from rags to riches. And it's a very much we reward, our stories are all about these risk takers and pioneers. But there are many cultures in the world where actually being the one who is responsible, who cares for the family, who does their duty, who creates harmony in the society, that those are the people who are the heroes. And so there are more or less prevention-focused and promotion-focused societies. And America is just so promotion-focused that really when I talk about prevention, people say, well, yeah, okay, being organized is good, but I mean, it's not as great as being creative. The reality is that without one, the other one doesn't get very far. And all organizations need both of those qualities, and people, in fact, can, I think, suffer a little bit when their personality is so tilted toward one or the other. If you don't have some balance, then you can kind of get into hot water. If you're so prevention focused, you never have any fun. You never have any experience of growth. If you're so promotion focused, then the bills don't get paid, and the practical things in your life don't get taken care of. And so there really is I think that there's a lot that's desirable about both, but we're just not used to thinking about prevention focus as being as desirable as it really is.
Well, and I think the important thing, we're in the height of football season right now. You can have an amazing quarterback, but if you don't have the defensive line to protect the quarterback, it doesn't really matter.
That's right. That's exactly right. And, offense might seem a little bit flashier, but a good defense, yes. Anybody in sports would know that the good defense is just as important as a good offense. And that is exactly what prevention-focused people are doing. They're playing a really strong defense. And they think they're not optimists by nature, and there's a reason for that. It doesn't actually work for them. The being optimistic to a prevention-focused person feels naive and foolish, and is actually demotivating. What prevention-focused people do instead is they're not pessimists either. So this is where it gets a little tricky, because pessimists believe that they can't succeed, and that's not good for anybody. I mean, nobody is better off being a pessimist. What prevention-focused people are sort of what we call defensive pessimists. They don't believe they're going to fail, but they believe they might fail if they don't take all the steps they need to take in order to keep failure from happening. So what prevention-focused people tend to do is think through everything that could go wrong and then take the steps to make sure that doesn't happen. So they end up being just as successful as promotion-focused people, but they get to that success a different way, with different strengths and different weaknesses.
Well, it sounds like with prevention-focused people, they're taking personal responsibility, right?
Very much so, yeah.
Instead of saying, I'm a victim to the world, they're going to take personal responsibility in case the worst-case scenario happens.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're not interested in being victims because they want to know. This is another interesting thing that we find when we look at with people who have these dominant focuses. Promotion-focused people do not like to dwell on their mistakes. They want to just keep their eyes moving forward. The downside, of course, to that is that they have a harder time learning from their mistakes because they don't want to dwell on them. Prevention-focused people dwell like crazy on their mistakes, but it's not dwelling for the sake of being miserable or feeling like a victim. They're really looking for, what can I learn from this so that this never happens again? So there is something that's very adaptive. I mean, even that, yes, you can make the argument that prevention focus is less fun, and that, it is, but it is really effective. And again, like I said, the upside to being prevention focused is a feeling of peace and tranquility and relaxation. And every mother I know, if you ask her, what it is you're looking for, she would say like, oh, I just want like 10 minutes in a bathtub by myself. We just want to, we just want to feel some relaxation and so that's that prevention focus kind of coming out and saying what I'm really after is not so much excitement and roller coaster rides. What I'm really after is tranquility and rest and knowing that everything's taken care of and everything is good. And so I wrote a piece for The Atlantic not too long ago about the changing meaning of happiness, that sort of when we get older, that a Saturday night in my life now that is spent, sitting in pajama pants with my kids and I'm reading an old book. I'm not even reading a new book. I'm rereading an old book. And that's a great Saturday night for me. And 20 years ago, I would have been horrified to know that was the Saturday night that was waiting for me 20 years in the future. But what it means to be happy changes. And you can kind of think of it in these promotion and prevention terms. Our sense of happiness as a kid, and even as a young adult, is very promotion focused. It's about excitement and energy and joy. And as we get older, our sense of what it means to be happy kind of starts to feel more like peace and relaxation and a sense of satisfaction and calm. And it's not worse; it's just different. And I wouldn't give up my peaceful 10-minute bath for any kind of exciting roller coaster ride. So but the language of promotion and prevention can help us to put a name on this thing that I think a lot of us experience as parents, and also give us a way to understand that our kids are seeing things usually, not always. You may have someone listening may have a very prevention-focused child. That definitely happens. And so that's interesting because you may find that the things that why isn't my kid acting like a typical kid, who's real excited and optimistic? Well, you may have a prevention-focused child, and that means you need to talk to them a little bit differently and try to engage them motivationally with that focus in mind.
Well, and so that brings me to the question, because like when you were talking about promotion, right, and I think about my teenager who doesn't want to dwell on her mistakes, right? And she's very promotion focused. And how do I communicate with my teenager about, okay, we don't need to dwell on it. We don't need to make it mean that you're a bad person, right? Because she's not. But what can we learn from it? So how do we bridge that communication gap when she's like, Mom, it's fine. I'm not going to dwell on it. And I'm like, but no, we need to learn about, what can we learn from this? And she's like, Mom, it's fine. And she rolls her eyes at me.
It's a great question. And the good news is that it turns out from the research we've done that really actually very subtle shifts in language can make a big impact. So just the difference between saying we need to look at what went wrong so that never happens again, right? So that we can keep that mistake from happening again. That's a very prevention-focused way to talk about what you're doing when you're kind of going over a mistake that was made or a problem. But you could actually just flip it around and say, we need to look at what happened so that you can do even better in the future and you can actually gain as much as possible from this experience. Little shifts like that, now that's a very promotion-focused way of talking about it. So in general, the rule of thumb is when you're talking promotion language, you talk about how doing X allows you to gain something. Doing X allows you to be better off. When you're talking prevention, you talk about how doing X helps you to avoid a problem, or how not doing X would result in a problem. If you don't do X, then you're going to really end up being in trouble. Okay, so we can often switch these things. So, for example, with incentives, right? So you can imagine a teacher saying to their class, everybody who, if you don't turn in your homework this week, you don't get to go on the school trip. Okay, so that's a very prevention-focused way to describe that situation, right? If you don't do your homework, you don't get to go on the school trip. A promotion way to describe it would be everybody gets to go on the school trip who does all their homework this week, right? So now doing homework is a way to get something good, right? Instead of not doing homework ending up being something bad, which is that language just doesn't and we have lots of studies on this. They're really interesting. You would think little shifts in language like that wouldn't matter because you're saying the same thing, right? But you're really not motivationally. And there's a level that's really not at all conscious that people engage or disengage in language. That it kind of what we know is that when you use language in a way that fits someone's motivation, it sounds more fluent to them. They think about it more deeply. And it's the expression that we've come up with to kind of capture this when we go into the laboratory and we say, when you hear this, how does it make you feel? And what people tell us, interestingly, is that it feels right. Now, feeling right is not the same thing as feeling good, because feeling good is positive. And prevention focus, as you have figured out by now, doesn't always feel good, but it feels right. So a prevention focused person will say, that thinking about the things that might go wrong feels right to me. It doesn't feel good. It's not fun, but it feels right. So that's what we're trying to get when we talk to people in their motivational language, that feeling of, yeah, that feels right. Doing my homework to get to go on a school trip, that feels right. Similarly, I know, this is we've just gone through a time of the year when a lot of parents were fretting over their kids applying to college, and invariably the kid thinks that they can apply to like 2 schools, and the parents like, you need a safety net, apply to 20 schools. And again, the way a parent would typically go, because they're coming to it from a prevention focused standpoint, right? You don't want to see them not have a place to go to school the next year. So you say, if you don't apply to a lot of colleges, then you may not get into one, and trouble. And the kids just roll their eyes at you. And if instead you say, if you actually apply to 10 schools instead of 2, you'll have a lot more choices. And you'll be better off because you'll have a lot more opportunities, and you can check out each one and see which one fits you best, right? So now you're, again, kind of spinning it in that this is how you can gain by doing X. And that's really what we try to get people to tune into with this work, is this idea that when you're trying to influence someone to want to do something, that if you have to match promotion-focused people want to hear how they can gain. Prevention-focused people want to hear how they can avoid loss. And that will not only make them more likely to agree that this is something they should do, but they'll make them more likely to actually do it.
So Heidi, as you're talking about this, it reminds me of when I was reading your book, Focus, before our last interview, and there was that my dad's voice in the back of my head of, I'm the expert, and I'm not going to pander to my children. Right. And talk in the manner that they understand, or in the manner that somebody else understands. Right. Because then I'm not going to be true to myself. And then when we talked last time, what finally clicked for me was kind of shifting it to, if you go to France and you start talking in English and you start yelling at them because they don't understand, they're still not going to understand any better. You need to speak in French or get an interpreter.
Right.
And that's really what you're saying with this, is that we need to speak in the language that the person on the other end understands.
Right, because your goal is communication. Mm-hmm. And people say, that I'm not being true to myself. Well, you can think about it however you like.
Mm-hmm.
You think about it in whatever language you want. But if your goal is trying to get somebody else on board, then it's only wise, really, to think about how is this, and really respectful, actually, to think about it as, from their point of view, from their perspective, how does this sound, and what's important to them, and what are they looking for? We talked about this last time when you're pitching something to your manager and you're trying to persuade them. It's the same thing with your kids. You really want the message to land. You want to be convincing. And if that means talking about it, again, it's not deception, because you really are. It's perfectly true that when you apply to 20 colleges, you not only are more likely to avoid having nowhere to go, but you're also more likely to have lots of choices. I mean, so really, it what you're saying is still as true, but you're describing it in a way that now is going to get their attention. And I think it is respectful. I think it's respectful to think about their perspective. I think it's not realistic to expect someone who hasn't had an adult's experiences to be to really be as sensitive to the what could go wrong aspect as adults are. I mean, we've just had a lot more stuff go wrong. So we get that, and we get how important that is. We also have a lot more responsibilities. So we're used to thinking in those terms. Kids are not. And especially in this day, I mean, it's probably, it may be 200 years ago, kids, you could talk to a 12-year-old about their responsibilities, and they had a whole bunch of them. but in this day and age, the kids don't really have that many, and that's okay. They'll get plenty. They have a whole lifetime to be an adult. But so in the meantime, you have to be aware of that. It's just not motivationally something that makes sense to, again, the average kid. Like I said, there will be prevention-focused children, just as there are many promotion-focused adults. So what you really want as a parent is to try to tune into, is my kid the kind of kid who's creative, who's a risk taker, who's always sort of overly optimistic about things, is my kid someone who's careful and organized and very upset when they make mistakes, and tends to be more anxious about things? If that describes your child, then actually you probably have a prevention-focused child. And one of the things people always ask, how do we end up one way or the other? There's really not one answer to that, and there's some evidence that temperament does have something to do with it, that we're kind of, we aren't born completely blank slates, and some kids might be a little bit more sensitive to positives, and some kids a little more sensitive to negatives, and so that is part of it. How we are parented is also part of it. Do you punish your children when they do something wrong by yelling or by taking away something that they want, or do you punish by sort of giving them the cold shoulder and taking away the positive, sort of the love and affection? Depending on how you punish them, that can shape, and how you reward them, that can shape their focus to some extent. But like I said, there's this tendency to be more promotion focused overall, but you always want to make sure. And really, it's not that hard to do. Kind of tune into your child, whether you're a parent or a teacher working with a child, and say, is this a kid who really tends to be a little reckless, a little creative, a little optimistic, prone to really high highs, and then sort of sad and dejected when things go wrong? Or is this a kid who's cautious and organized and tends to be quite anxious when things aren't going their way? And that'll tell you what you're working with.
Heidi, does childhood trauma affect the focus of the child?
We don't know. I mean, the short answer is yes. We would absolutely expect it to. There's not been a lot of research directly looking at promotion and prevention, but of course there is really a lot of research looking at the experiences of depression and anxiety in children who experience traumas. And again, it depends a little bit on the nature of the trauma. So if for example, a child experiences a trauma that is life-threatening, where they feel in danger, that can lead to lasting anxiety, and we would expect that to be a relatively more prevention-focused child. And again, maybe dangerously so. Any promotion and prevention taken too far, again, will leave you a little bit unbalanced. You're not going to. Most people need to have a little bit of each in their lives in order to function well. And again, if the kind of trauma a child experiences is like a loss of love and caring, so neglect, or a death of one's caretakers, one's parents, then you might expect that to lead to a lasting depression, which would be more of a promotion-focused kind of child, but a child that's promotion-focused but not able to be optimistic, not able to function well. So yeah, we do see those things as mapping on, and in adults as well. That if you are somebody who's prone to bouts of depression, you're probably a promotion-focused person who's not really who's having some problems in your life emotionally and in reaching goals. But depression is a promotion-focused kind of problem. It's the absence of feeling that joy of advancement and progress. Anxiety is a prevention-focused problem. It's feeling that you're constantly in danger of making a mistake and everything's going to go wrong.
Okay. And then something else that you said, and going back to my, my little story about my dad, is that maybe this is where parenting has changed, is, my dad's generation and my grandparents' generation, it was really about control. Do as I say because I know better, right? And it was control. And here we're talking not about controlling our kids, but about influencing. And so is that why when you want to influence, it's really important to understand who the other person on the other side essentially of the table?
Absolutely. It is a very important difference. I'm glad you brought this up because as a parent, you always hope that the values and the goals that there's a lot that we can make our kids do. There's not an infinite amount. Clearly, there's lots of things we can't make them do, but there are plenty of things that we can make them do. But your goal as a parent is always ultimately to have them, internalize those goals and values so that when they're on their own, they're going to make choices that are consistent with the values and the goals that you would hope for them to have, so that the ones that are going to lead them to be the happiest and the most successful and the most effective. So that's why I think this you really can't force a way of thinking on someone. They have to at some point embrace it. And that's why I think the language of influence is really useful here, because in many ways that is what we're doing with our kids. We're trying to influence them. We're trying to get them to believe that doing certain things are really what's in their best interest. And so that is exactly why thinking about using the right kind of language is so important, because that it's much more like what you were saying. We find that matching motivational language leads to this experience of feeling a feeling of rightness, right? Oh, that feels right to me. And that's exactly the feeling you're looking for as a parent. You know that everything you say isn't going to sound good or sound fun, but you want it to sound right, and you want them to experience it as right. And that is something that matching motivational language can do for you, to kind of convey that feeling of rightness. Now, I think when I talk about influence and motivating, we talk just because in English we use those words a little bit in an overlapping way, but there really are two parts of the puzzle you can think about. The first part is getting your child to agree that something is a good idea, right? To really internalize it. This is the right thing to do. And then the second part is actually getting them to do it. And we all have that dichotomy too. I mean, there's not a person. There are very, very few people who are overweight, who are in an unhealthy state of overweightness, that don't believe that it would be good if they lost weight. I mean, so it's not so much a question of influence, right? They're on the same page. They agree that it would be good for them to lose weight, but then you have to actually do it, which is why, that's where the hard part comes in. So there's influence, this is a good idea, and then there's motivating, really, to get somebody to actually do the thing that even they themselves agree is a good thing to do. The nice thing about the using the right motivational language and matching it for promotion and prevention is that we find that it does both. So we know that it is that what you say is more persuasive, it's more believable, people trust you more when you speak their motivational language. But we also know that people find it more engaging. And that engagement translates into being actually more likely to take action. So you're kind of getting a 2-for-1 when you use the right motivational language. You're not only helping them to absorb something that you hope will be a lasting value or lasting goal that they will have, but you're getting them to be much more likely to actually do it. And this is actually good advice not to just use with your kids, but frankly to use with your spouse or anyone in your life. That too often spouses in particular are very likely to. We find actually many married couples or many long-term couples have one partner who's relatively more promotion and one is more prevention, and that's actually a good thing, because it turns out that couples who are complementary rather than the same end up reporting that they are more satisfied in their marriages. And in a way, it makes sense. It's sort of like talent sharing. There's somebody to do the prevention things and somebody to do the promotion things. But it is important. It can also cause problems because obviously you can have lots of fights stemming from, my husband and I certainly do, stemming from sort of one person's tendency to be more conservative and risk averse and the other person wanting to kind of take risks and do more adventurous things. And so having the language of promotion and prevention to sort of understand your differences and then be able to speak to each other. Again, it's not manipulation. It's really just trying to say, okay, looking at this from your perspective, why would this be a good idea? And then talking about it in that language is really, really helpful. And that's something that I know in my marriage was very, very helpful when we both sort of realized this was a source of conflict, and being able to sort of say, okay, well, from your perspective, I think this is why this would be a good idea. And it's really great. There's sort of a meeting of the minds there. And it's something I think we can achieve with our teenagers too, and with the people we work with. There is a sort of, okay, I'm taking the time to see these through your eyes. And by the way, with an older child, a teenager, I would even recommend talking to them about this difference. That there is a way in which adults see things differently, and they think more in these terms, and you as a younger person think a little bit more in these terms, and that's natural and good, and neither of us is wrong. And so this is a way for you to understand where I'm coming from when I talk sometimes, and a way for me to understand where you're coming from. And I think that can only make things even better, because it will give your child too a tool, if they're old enough to kind of grasp these concepts, I think a tool for understanding where you're coming from sometimes as well.
So Heidi, what happens when, you go to ask the question to your kid and their answer, they put the armor up of, I don't know.
Yeah, what do you do then? I think there are so many ways to tackle this, and a lot of it is going to be idiosyncratic. Between you and your child, children are not all the same, and one of the frustrating things, I write books that sort of count as being self-help books, and one of the frustrating things I know that people have when they read these books and they say, this is how you do X with your child, and then it doesn't work. And you feel like, am I doing it wrong? And it just turns out that people are complicated and diverse, and so there probably isn't one, for any of us, one thing that's going to work with everybody. But again, I think, starting by kind of trying to capture their motivation is one place. And then the other thing is, regular, if you can't get at it at one time, try again. And I don't mean like by, shoving yourself in your child's face all the time. But one of the most robust findings, and people have heard this, and it comes up again and again and again, is that like families who eat together, that have a lot fewer problems. And there's nothing magical about eating. So if you can't eat together, it's not the end of the world. but what happens at the dinner table is something that can happen and you can create other times for it, is that people talk. Mm-hmm. And they because of course you do. It's just really boring if you don't talk. And you end up, as a parent, knowing more things about your kid's life, and your kids know more about your life. And so it seems to be that setting aside regular times for communication is really the key. And there will be plenty of quiet dinners. I mean, and it may take a long time for you to get out of your kid this thing that you really want to talk about with them. But the more opportunities you give it, without pressuring it too much, but the more opportunities you give it, the more likely they are to eventually come out with the thing that they're themselves trying to figure out a way to talk about. One of the things we know about promotion focus, and this, I think you see this with teenagers a lot, is again this real reluctance to dwell on what went wrong. It feels wrong to them. It literally feels wrong. Just as for a prevention focused person, dwelling on what wrong actually feels right. It feels terrible, but it feels right. It feels like the right thing to do. When you're promotion focused, dwelling on things that went wrong feels wrong. It feels like it's bringing you down, and it feels like it's not productive for you. And so there's this real sense, and again, it's not necessarily conscious, where people kind of want to avoid thinking about these things that didn't go so well. And they feel like if I can just avoid thinking about it, everything will be fine. Now, eventually that will stop working, because, we're not really very good at that. Human beings are not very good at suppressing things for the long term. So eventually, if you continue to be there for your child and open to conversation, you'll get the answers. I think you're much more likely to get the answers you're looking for. But again, know that obstacle is there for them. It just feels wrong. It feels like their intuition is telling them that it would be better for them to just not talk about it and try to move on. And again, our intuition as adults is often the opposite.
Well, I've found the dining room table is always a good place. So even if we, with sports schedules and stuff, we don't eat together as a family.
Yes.
If I eat earlier with another child, when my other daughter comes home, I'll go and sit at the table and we'll just have conversations. And, sometimes it's, whoever's at the table, we just talk. But the other areas are after practice in the car. My teenager seems to want to talk. And since I know she doesn't listen to my show, I can talk about this. And then the other thing that I have gone to do is I started wearing makeup because that's an area that she's really interested in. So in the morning, in the mornings, getting ready, and I'll talk to her because she watches all those YouTube videos about what's the best of this and that. And so her being able to have her own expertise where I don't know anything about it. And then sometimes I can pop in and ask questions. But if I'm like preparing for an interview, and last week I was interviewing Kristen Neff from University of Texas and stuff.
Oh, yeah, I love her.
And so I was reading this stuff. And so then all of a sudden I looked at my daughter. I was on the couch and I asked her some questions and she's like rolling her eyes like, oh no, here goes mom. Right. Those aren't good conversations to have with her because she's like, I don't know. Right. It's fine. And so knowing the opportune times of where can we be? And the bathroom has turned out to be one of those spaces because she is more the expert in that area. Right. Mm-hmm. And so she's more comfortable, it seems. So I don't know, but
I know that makes a lot of sense. And actually, if you're, Kristen Neff's stuff is all about self-compassion and how we should forgive ourselves for the things that go wrong. Again, you can see how that's something that maybe a teenager doesn't want to talk about, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want to think about the things that went wrong. Mm-hmm. I don't want to think about whether I'm sufficiently self-compassionate because that would require me to think about the things that have gone wrong, and I don't want to do that, So again, there's this you as a parent are trying to teach this wonderful thing to your child to not be so hard on themselves and to be more self-loving, and all they hear is, oh, mom wants to talk about my feelings about things that I've screwed up, and I don't want to talk about that,
mm-hmm.
And that is a real obstacle for anybody, whether you're a teacher or a parent or a therapist who's trying to work with a child. There'll be a sense in which that just feels like a place that if they go there, it's not going to be good for them. And so sometimes we have to just wait until it kind of comes out. Or like you said, pay attention to the patterns and know when the times are. My mother used to love to try to talk to me right when I got home from school. And I'm one of these people that has a real circadian rhythm dip at 3 o'clock from 3 to 4. All I want to do is sleep. I just feel tired and grumpy, and I have my whole life. And she would always sit down let me hear all about your day. And it was the last thing I wanted to do was talk. And so it took her a while to figure out that she should just pick a different time of day to try to talk to me. And so when we pay attention to those patterns in our kids, we're much more likely to. My kids are the same way. There's times that they're chatty. There are times when they are not. And rather than try to force it on them, just wait for that moment in their rhythm when they feel like opening up. And it's really great that you observe that.
Well, and that goes back to that idea about influence versus control of, no, this is the time that's appropriate for me to have this conversation with you. So let's have it when they may not be ready. Because the same thing, my kids, even though, you're told be home after school so that way you can know what happened in their day.
Right.
My kids will check in, but they actually like it when I'm busier in the afternoon, just to say hello and then move on. The times that my kids are the most, my oldest, the one that she's most chattiest is after practices, after she has come decompressed from her school day, gone off and done some physical exercise. And then she gets in the car and she's like that 5-year-old kid that I used to have, right? Where she just can't stop talking. And we're like, whoa, we're just trying to keep up. So understanding that. So going to this idea of influence and motivation, one of the areas, because I used to teach at community college, and one of the areas in education that's really troubling is, the boys. We're losing the boys. Right. The boys aren't buying in to why it's important to become educated, to get good grades, right? And so how do we influence that with the children? How do we talk to them?
I think that's a great question, and I think again there's of course going to be more than one thing we need to do to solve this problem. But coming from my perspective and what I do, I would say one of the big problems we have is, again, that we tend to talk to people about not the opportunities that a college degree will give them, or the great things that will happen if they can just stick it out. We have a real problem with students entering college but not finishing.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the problem is, that trying to get people to hang in there. And there's lots of things we can do in terms of support on campus and things like that. But in terms of just the way we talk about it, even, again, the message, I always hear people saying, if you don't go to college, you won't be able to blah-de-blah. You won't be able to get a job. No one will hire you. It's always these threats. And you know what? That works on a prevention-focused person, which is part of why it works better on women.
Mm-hmm.
Because women are more prevention-focused on average. Women are already, in young adulthood, starting to think about duties and responsibilities and obligations, and making sure that they're going to be able to take care of themselves and their kids eventually. So they're already making that shift. Young men. Insurance companies call them the young immortals, right? These young men in their 20s who think they're going to live forever, they're never going to have any problems, and everything's going to be fine. And so they're still very much a promotion-focused group. So we need to really kind of change the messaging. It needs to be less about scary, scary, scary things that will happen if you don't do X, and more about here's all the awesomeness. Here's all the great ways that you can advance and be better off. I have a nephew who the family had a very hard time convincing that he should go to college. And I think, again, the messaging was really off. Everybody kept saying, not me, but everybody kept saying, if you don't go to school, horrible, horrible, horrible things will happen. And he had a couple of really good, thank goodness, experiences visiting some colleges where he saw for the first time what it could offer him, how it could actually be awesome and amazing to go to college, and the ways that he could end up better off than he is now. And that was compelling to him, whereas the threats and the warnings and the ominous cautionary tales was just not doing anything for him. Positive role models who have gone to college and had awesome things happen to them are much more persuasive to a young promotion-focused male than a string of cautionary tales about you don't want to end up like cousin Bobby, blah, blah, blah. So, I think, again, the messaging really matters. How we try to talk to them about why this is something that is worth doing really matters. And then, on top of it, like I said, we have to have the support in place, and then we have to make it affordable and all those other kinds of things. But really, in terms of just influencing them so that they get to a point where they think this is a good idea, I think the right motivational language can go a long way to making that happen.
So because you talked about earlier about we need to get them to influence them, to get them to buy into it being a good idea. And then the next step is the motivation of, okay, now let's go take the action. And so a lot of these boys, they're not even buying in that it's a good idea to get good grades and to go off to college.
Exactly. And that really is the first step. There's a lot of kids who are going to college, essentially being bribed into try it for a year by their parents and things like that, try it for a semester. And that's not a horrible idea in the sense that, again, you hope that once they're on campus, they see all of the great things that can come from it, and that then makes it something they themselves want to do. But I think on college campuses, parents, everybody's sort of involved. If we keep the emphasis on these are all the ways you can benefit, rather than just college being another place where these are all the things you have to do. And if you don't do them, then you're going to flunk out of school. That's the language we have to get away from, because it's just not one that works for them. It doesn't feel right. And we want the college experience to be something that feels right. And so it really has to be, how can I end up, the message always has to be, how can I end up better off if I do X? And if we keep that consistent, we have a much better shot at making them not only want to go, but then also while they're there, continue to be motivated to do it.
Well, and is there, because one of the things, and I know this with a good family friend, the father is very, very financially successful in his job, makes a tremendous amount of money. They live a very nice lifestyle, right? And their college student son just doesn't want to work very hard. But part of me wonders is that even though his dad has, all those accolades of success, is tremendously unhappy. Does that where the message of you need to do this so you can get a good paying job, but then the kid sees, well, you have this great paying job, but you're really miserable and stressed, and I don't want that.
Right.
So
I do see. It's like, how is that better off?
Yeah.
How is that better off? And that's all. The other thing is, it's not better off compared to someone who works a really dangerous and horrible job and gets paid nothing for it. It's always better off compared to where I am now. That is so. And then that's another thing where they say, well, obviously this is a good thing for you to do. Well, how does that make me better off than I am right now? That's the question that kid is sort of on some level, consciously or not, asking. So is his father better off than he is right now, living at home with his parents or whatever he's doing and kind of benefiting from that? And if the answer is no, then that's just not going to look attractive. It wasn't until my nephew saw that his relatively cushy life as well, that the college offered him something that was even better than what he had right now. That he went, oh yeah, that's worth doing. So what is he missing in his life right now that working hard could give to him? And that's kind of the direction to go in to find that. And it's not, it's not something. Being undermotivated is pretty common. It's something that a lot of parents are dealing with. And why doesn't my kid see that this is important? And why don't they see the dangers? Well, they're not going to see the dangers. They're just not focused that way. You have to think about it differently. And it's okay. How can I make my child see that if he does this, he'll be even better off than he is right now? That's the question to ask, and that's the direction to go in, and to try to find an answer.
I think that's a great question to end on, whether it's he or she, but what is our child missing in their life right now that working hard could give them? Right. And if we can ask that, then open up whatever the different scenario is and test things out. Like you said, there's not this one easy fix.
Exactly. Yeah. Be trial and error. Be patient with yourself and them. It'd take you maybe a little while to find it. But if you're at least the research gives us a sense of what direction to go in to try to find the answer, and I think that's a great place to start.
Well, Heidi, thank you so much for coming back and having this conversation with me.
Thank you. It's always fun to talk to you anytime.
Well, thank you. This is Corinne Motakaitis, and you've been listening to Dr. Heidi Grant Halvorson, and her latest book is Focus: Use Different Ways of Seeing the World to Power, Success, and Influence. Thanks for listening to How She Really Does It. I invite you to subscribe to my weekly newsletter at howshereallydoesit.com. I do this show each week for you, so you can now see the windows of possibilities in your own life. I believe there are many journeys for us to take. We can learn from others to see what is possible for ourselves. I believe there are possibilities for all of us, not just the ones who've acquired great success, but including those of us who have stumbled, lost our way, or only saw closed doors. With this show, maybe you can now see a glimmer coming through the windows. I call that the windows of possibility. Each week, I bring a guest who represents those possibilities. They too have had their own struggles and uncertainty, yet somehow they have found their way. My guests are an example of what is possible when you continue, when you learn, leap, fall down, and get back up. I invite you into this space so you can ask yourself, if that is possible for them, what is possible for me? Really ask yourself that. I would love to connect with you. Please join me at www.howshereallydoesit.com. And thanks for listening today.
On a lake, she is dreaming, she is drifting, never been so wide awake.